This week on Forward.
When it's a big company, people disagree, or there's, that's not the process, whatever it is, the things that delay progress. But at the end of the day, you're just like, shrug, it's UBS, it's not me. I think that happens in DC all the time, like you're a big company. But the problem is that the consequence of this is not just like UBS has is a little more inefficient or a worse quarter or more bureaucratic, right? The problem is like our livelihoods, like our country. The bureaucracy versus the stakes are off.
Happy holidays, everyone. A special episode of me and Zach reviewing the year that was, 2024. Did anything happen this year?
The year that was.
Yeah.
How you feeling, man?
I've been reflecting on the year that was a lot because we started the year in New Hampshire.
We did.
No, I mean, that itself was fun and fascinating, where, if I remember right, you were up there essentially all of January?
Yeah. I was there all of the whole month. Yeah. I made Carly come for like a couple weeks.
Yeah, so I joined you up there as well, and it was good fun. But when I think about the year, it's funny to think about starting out winter New Hampshire. And it's like, oh, winter New Hampshire, Dunkin' Donuts, we're back.
Yep. It was like a version of getting back in the saddle a little bit, like.
Well, one of the funniest things was that Jeff Weaver, who was on that campaign, at the end of it, he was like, see you in 4 years.
Shout out Jeff Weaver. That guy was fun. Really fun guy.
Yeah, so
really smart guy too.
So when I think about this year, there are a number of punctuation marks that stick out. Certainly Dean's campaign in New Hampshire, and then South Carolina, where we followed it around, and that went for let me say like the first quarter of this year.
Got you through February.
Yeah, certainly through February, and then afterwards we're like, all right, the Democrats, there's no saving them from themselves. Like they're just gonna do this Joe thing, even though it's dumb.
And we fell in line a bit.
At that point we're like,
I think you're supposed to.
At this point, I mean, we did everything we could to create optionality, and then when they weren't having any of that in the primary ends, and it's like, all right, I guess we're doing this. And so the wild thing was that we had accepted, like the selection of Joe until the debate, and then you and I are texting, and that's when I felt kind of redrafted into action. It was like, oh wow, this pass the torch thing. And by the way, I put out a post too that I didn't think anything was gonna do. I was like, oh, Joe should pass the torch, and like who knew that it was gonna blow up the way that it did.
Yeah, post.
And so then I was on the clock for the following month or so, and this was summer.
When was the debate?
It was I want to say mid-late June.
Yeah.
And then Joe gets out of the way mid-late July.
Yep. I remember I was texting. I think you were. Did you watch it live or you watching a replay? You were doing something. I remember texting me like, "Dude, I don't know. This is not going very well for Joe.
Yeah.
Very tough to stay on this team." That's kind of the vibe of the text, if I remember.
Yeah. We were comparing notes.
It's not gonna be good, man.
Yeah. So, but I was like, I guess this is on. Because my like literally reporters were texting me in real time being like, will you talk about this? Will you talk about this? And
that was the other thing, no one would go on. The reason you had like a mini like cycle was no one would go on the record. The Dems were still in line.
So weird.
And then remember there was a period of time where Joe would not, like there was like, how are they going to get him out?
Yeah, totally.
Because he has to actually agree to it. Turns out they may have done it just behind his back. We're not really sure.
Oh no! So I was in touch with people every single day during the Pass the Torch era, and
that's what we'll call it.
Oh, the Pass the Torch era was very, very real for me. And for those of you who follow me and Zach, I hope you've been entertained by this year, because all of a sudden, all of my messaging in the beginning of the year is just like Dean Phillips. Mm-hmm. Remember that? We pretty much was like everything is just going to be about boosting Dean.
That's probably why they didn't want you to help them campaign. They were vindictive over that.
Oh yeah, I mean, eventually the Dems were out on me because I'd crossed the line by calling for Joe to get out of the way. And So I mean, it's funny to think about if you were, following. Let's say you were getting my emails. All of a sudden, it's like, who's this Dean Phillips guy? Yang seems obsessed with Dean Phillips, and you went up and met with him last year. It was
October.
It was October. So there was a period when it's like, all right, we're doing this, and then Dean's campaign ends. We're like, all right, I suppose, no choice but to watch Joe get crushed. And then there's this flare up of hope during the Pass the Torch era. And every day I'm talking to folks in DC, I'm talking to journalists, I'm talking to donors. I'm feeding journalists stories where it's like some journalists will contact me and be like, hey, can you set me up with a Dem donor who is out on Joe? It's like, I'd be glad to. And then, and then there was a Pass the Torch rally in front of the White House. Yeah. And so this was funny too. So I get a note being like, hey, can you try and get people to this rally? And then I send a message out about the rally. And the text of I apologize for it's like I ask, I don't know, it was either AI or a human, but like, hey, can you produce a template of this email to go to the rally? And then the template comes out and I look at it, I'm like, yeah, it's fine. But the text of the email makes it seem like I might be at that rally in DC. But part of it too was
the rally? Like, sorry, I interrupted, but who's was it?
It was the Pass the Torch PAC.
The PAC did. Okay, got it.
Now, my going would have been a mistake anyway, because
okay.
The last thing you want to do is put have the headlines be around me as opposed to ambient pissed off Dems who want Joe to get out of the way.
It's more of a people's movement, yeah.
But then I had a person go being like, hey, where are you?
Oh, no.
And then, so anything that I could do during the Pass the Torch era, I would do, whether it's go on. So I did a lot of press for sure. I did some donor wrangling. I did some planting of stories to the extent that I was able to do that. I did some organizing. I did some fundraising. I did all this stuff, and then that ends up culminating in Joe getting out of the way in July. And so then there was like the hurry up mode. There was this 12-hour period where it's not necessarily Kamala, and so then you spring into action. And I was calling, I had all these calls coming in being like, who's it going to be if it's not Kamala? And I was like, and so I was in the you should have a mini primary camp.
Yep.
And then one by one, all of the potential challengers to Kamala disappears. Or they don't disappear. They say, I endorse Kamala.
Yeah.
And the last person who might have not endorsed Kamala was J.B. Pritzker. And as soon as J.B. Pritzker said, I'm endorsing Kamala, then everyone threw in the towel. My phone blows up with, it's over.
I guess so. Now, why do you think they all fell in line like that? Do you think they got pressured? Do you think it's because Biden already just rolled behind his VP and it was just resolving to that option? What do you think?
I think it was numbers where it technically, if you had enough DNC delegates that were into you and not Kamala, then you could contest. But Kamala was working the phones, calling every delegate, being like, hey, you behind me, you behind me, you behind me. Right. And so I'm just going to use J.B. Pritzker as an example, because J.B. Pritzker and Gavin Newsom are the two people who were known to have campaigns in waiting where they could have pulled the trigger. And so J.B. Pritzker, I believe, was getting word that's like, look, the delegates are lining up behind Kamala. If you decide to run against Kamala, you will lose. Mm-hmm. But you could tell that there was like a bit of a waiting game where that they were trying to figure out if they had a path. And then when they figured out that they didn't want to do it or didn't have a path, they said, and then when J.B. Pritzker says I endorse Kamala, my phone is all like, well,
and we've talked about this too, is that there's a certain level of, because you and I have talked about this on the podcast. Like, I think the Democratic bench in some ways is kind of deep. You got some good players there, but the problem is, why do we think of them? Why do people think of them when you think who's the Dem bench? It's because they're a governor of a big state of some sort. They've been on CNN, Fox, MSNBC, and they've done well. And they maybe had a moment or two of national aplomb, or like national, some sort of credit, right? Now, the problem is, realistically, even us who follow this relatively closely, we don't actually know if they'd be a good candidate. We actually don't know, we don't know their why for running, besides it's my turn or I somewhat can. And so getting out there, I agree, like Pritzker, like got probably a compelling message if he could get it right, like has the right profile, etc. I mean, theoretically, not sure it would take him time to have the Democratic Party and the American people get to know him, right? There wasn't actually a long runway for that, At least Kamala was the devil you knew.
Well, so a lot of folks like JB, I think, were like, look, let me not do this hurry up one this cycle. I'll just wait till I have a full cycle. And so in 2028, I was actually listing out folks that are going to run in the Democratic primary, and man, is that a long list.
It's going to be, there's 28, 29 major candidates in 2020. I think you're over under that in 2028.
I counted 15 really easily. And I will say, too, that a lot of them are governors, a lot of them, and the Dems objectively would have been much better off running a governor, because when voters would talk about the border, they'd be like, I had nothing to do with it. And then they'd be like, oh, yeah, you had nothing to do with it. It's like, I'm as pissed off as you were. I was in Harrisburg, like, or whatever it is. And be like, oh, yeah. Whereas, Kamala had to be like, I wouldn't do it.
That's a good point.
So,
the borders are for, depending who you ask.
Yes. So this is one of, and I don't want to necessarily do this. Maybe we'll do the next, but I mean that, like, already essentially, like, nothing matters to the Democratic Party until they figure out their nominee in 28. So like that's where all of the attention already is internally. Well, right now they're trying to select a DNC chair, and then the main task of the DNC chair will be like, what's the process going to be?
Yeah. It's Mark Cuban said this on his podcast tour. I heard it on All In, but I think he said it elsewhere, is that the parties are somewhat dead, and that I don't think that's fair on the face of it. But his point was that whoever the nominee is, the party just does what they want. So Trump is the Republican Party right now, and the problem is we have a Democratic Party with no heft. It needs a leader, so the Dems are like, what do we do? Like, we don't know, because there's no one actually really in charge.
Well, so people from my campaign remember this quote, that Washington, D.C. is not a town of leaders, it's a town of followers.
Good quote.
And I have a friend in D.C. who actually said to me that in that town, there are a lot of people who be like, well, it's not for me to do, like, the big decision, because I'm just like I'm
just a senator. I'm
just like a member of the House. Or even in some cases, like, I'm just like a chief of staff. I'm just a policy. Like, there's like this very rigid hierarchy. And then to Mark's point, it's like, what do we do? It's like, let's ask Joe Biden, which is one reason why what happened with the Democratic Party was so fascinating, that they canceled the primary. Jamie Harrison, who, by the way, if you were to run a list of people, like, we let Jamie Harrison off the hook because we kind of know he has no agency. It's just like whatever the heck.
Just doing what they say.
But if he was like a real leader, he would have been like, hey, Joe, you old, like, this bad. And then
it's why, like, a Buttigieg would be an interesting party chair, because Pete has enough popular appeal that he could sway the party in a direction, right? He probably won't do it because he wants to run. He ran for the position. That's right. That's how he got pretty popular before he ran for president.
But someone like that, I think, would be really positive. Someone who has a point of view and a heft and a degree of like independence to exercise their judgment, as opposed to, and this is one of the problems of the Democratic Party, is that instead you wind up with someone who's like, I'm just an administrator.
Yes.
Like, I'm not going to
keep my job in Democratic politics.
Yeah, I'm not going to make substantive decisions. I'm not going to go against like the boss.
We had that when we were trying to get on the ballot, by the way. When Dean Phillips was trying to get on the ballot, it was up to, generally speaking, the party chair could yay or nay that bad boy. Especially when the rules were ambiguous. It's like, you need to have adequate press coverage, which could mean one article or all the articles, right? It can mean anything. Off the record, they'd be like, I want to keep my job. This is my livelihood. I'm a Democratic operative. Like, I can't go against the president. I'm sorry. Like, I know it's BS. I know it's not cool. I don't like this. It makes me want to quit, but I'm not gonna, because
this is like, by the way, an undercurrent of some of like the terrible behavior that's going on. And one reason I'm so grateful to all of you, I'm just grateful generally, in that, like, we can more or less do what we think is right. And it's very, very hard to fire me and Zach because we don't work for anybody. You know what I mean?
You have other means of
Yeah,
livelihood.
we're independent actors. We do things. We blah,
That's
blah,
a good
blah.
point. When I hear you talk, or hopefully people hear me talk, there's no puppeteer, just us. We could be wrong, but
Yeah,
there's not some darker force at play with us.
It's one reason why I think that we were such interesting figures in this cycle, because it's like, hey, Joe Biden, really old, really unpopular, emperor has no clothes, and no one's willing to say it. And then I'm just like, hey guys, like, this guy is a terrible candidate, and then be like, oh, say that again. It's like, what? I mean, aren't we all thinking it? Hello, YouTube. Please do hit that like and subscribe button. And don't forget, you can ask questions at mailbag@andrewyang.com. See you on the interwebs. And by the way, so here's like the macro backdrop is that it's getting harder and harder to make a living in a lot of these industries that we're talking about. I'm going to make this argument. Okay. Media harder. Objectively, like journalists are dropping like flies. People's contracts are getting cut.
Smart, talented people not getting into media right now.
Yeah. By the way, if you think about it, and I actually went to college with a woman who went down this road. Generally, it's like, how would you make it as a television journalist? You know what you would do? You'd go do a local news station somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And then you would get some tape, and then you'd climb the ranks, and then someone would, like a lot of the local journalism opportunities don't even exist anymore.
So then you create your own YouTube
there's
show or podcasts, and that's brutal. Like Carly has had to look at international opportunities because it's not great in the U.S.
So the media incentives then, and we can talk about the alternative. And one of the big themes of this year was continued institutional erosion and then the rise of the alternative. Yeah. So the media is an example where you have like traditional media it's harder and harder, but then the incentives of people within the traditional media then get also more noxious, because it's like, oh shit, like I can't lose this gig, because if I lose this gig, I'm effed. Politics, I'm going to say the same. It's that you think that these people's jobs are safe, and it's like kind of true. But I think it's getting tougher generally.
If you're a strong leader, like leadership is a thing you're good at. I think there was a time in American history where politics was an interesting path for you and would benefit the American people. I don't think that's a true statement still.
That person, if they decided to be like, yo, this is wrong what we're doing to Dean, and did something on principle, they get fired and they never get another job in politics.
It incentivizes herd mentality, right?
Yeah. It's like we're kind of destroying character. So you have media, certainly politics, and so that you have more and more lemmings. And then you do have some folks who've managed to strike out on their own, and this is very rare, and I don't recommend it. And I sometimes see journalists head this direction where they lose their job and like, it's okay, I'm gonna Substack.
I got my podcast Substack path.
Yeah, my and then they do it and they're like, wait a minute, like, I can't put together a salary on this stuff.
Tough. And then what you have to do, you start monetizing your audience, you start selling t-shirts, you start selling this, and it becomes like it's a weird, shilly grind.
And so this is one thing too that, again, I'm very grateful for a lot of things. Yeah, I lived a version of it. But one thing I said to you back in 2020, I said, if I become a talking head after this, come shoot me in the face or something like that.
You did say that directly. And we've spent a lot of time preventing you from becoming a talking head.
Yeah, because, and this is not against my friends who are talking heads, but like if you're a talking head, what you do is you convince yourself, it's like, oh, I'm making a big difference. Yeah. I'm making a big difference. So I have to...
I always think athletes have
stay in this job
after they retire. It's like to be relevant. They used to be in this, especially if you're a good one. Like Tom Brady, like what do you do after you're like the greatest? Now he's a commentator. And that's
I think about this a fair amount too.
Yeah,
because you see some of the big time athletes, and then you see them on, ESPN doing whatever the heck, and you're just like, is your highest use commentating a role?
It's tough.
But then you think, well, what else are you going to do?
Well, ideally they get into coaching. Ideally they get into coaching, but that's a grind too, because you don't make any money until you're experienced. Like I think about RG3, who I listened to a couple podcasts. I like him. I think he's a pretty smart guy. I think he's thoughtful. I don't think he got his second contract. He like lit the country on fire. Rookie of the year, I think. Took him to the playoffs, etc. And then busted his knee. Didn't work out. Never really got going. Now he's like it's like a version of an influencer. I think ESPN laid him off. I don't think it was his fault. It was just kind of caught up in the layups. And like, what do you do? You know, like,
well, that's part of the problem.
things.
Is like it used to be. I'm going to use a pro wrestling example here. It's sort of funny, but it used to be like you lost your job at one network, another network would hire you, and then now it's like is another network going to hire you? So you wind up with like some very, very tough, noxious impulses to be like really, really conformist. And then in that culture too, if someone does decide to do the right thing, like you actually hate them. you know what I mean?
Get blackballed or
well, and this is one thing that sort of happened too. And I this is like you remember when Washington Post decided not to endorse?
Yeah, which I think was probably, given the current climate, the right thing.
There was an argument. It was a very legit argument.
But they got shit on. It
was
roasted.
poorly timed and poorly framed.
Yeah.
But there was a very legitimate argument. And then they lost something like 250,000 subs.
Yeah. So obviously it's tough for me to say that was the right thing to do.
And then there were a couple of journalists who resigned in protest.
Oh, no. I didn't see that part. People walked out?
Yeah, they did walk out.
Where are they going to go?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think I saw at least one of them got
back in the day,
hired.
If that was the only source of information, it was somewhat helpful to see the endorsement. I don't even know if you can make arguments both sides. But now you get information from everywhere. If you need the New York Times to tell you to vote for, I would challenge you to think a little more critically.
Well, the argument is that it's not really going to persuade anyone who's on the fence. It's not like there were a bunch of folks. I mean, the most persuasive stuff that happened in the cycle was probably Joe Rogan's interviews and endorsements.
I thought the debate,
and some other folks.
I think Kamala did well at the debate. Like, I think it reminded all of us that Trump doesn't have like high integrity conversations about things. You know what I mean? Like, oh wow, he is pretty crazy at times.
At least when I think about the stuff that made a difference in November, the things that pop out to me are some of the independent media figures, and this is something that you and I have been talking about for years, in part because we lived a version of it, that there was going to be this rise of the independent figures. I mean, heck, do you know more people watched Trump's interview with Joe Rogan than watched the debate?
That checks out.
And I'm going to suggest that some of those people probably were low propensity voters, but a lot of them were probably more persuadable, because of the folks that watched the debates, 90% of them knew which one of those two they were going to.
I mean, if you're Dem, you just got to play the moderate, don't make mistakes role. Just be the rational, solid, plain vanilla, frankly, candidate. I know people are mad, et cetera, but Trump's going to make his mistakes. He's going to say stupid things. He's going to say, like, et cetera. He's going to be polarizing. If you could have played, but the problem was, who made more like gaffes and stupid comments and bad clips? Like, the answer is Tim Walz and Kamala Harris. And if we're objective about it, like, Trump had his moments, sure, but Kamala not be able to answer basic questions. Tim Walz claiming he was at Tiananmen Square and like crazy stuff coming out of his mouth, like that stuff. If your argument is like the Dems are a resort into like coming back to sanity, like, we can have it, dude.
Hey all, if you know me, you know I'm not that handy in the kitchen, and I have become a huge believer and booster of Factor. Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals make eating a joy. It's so fast. You just pop that thing 2 minutes later, and you are eating a restaurant-quality, healthy meal, making you feel excellent about yourself. My favorite is the turkey chili with zucchini, and there is so much more to choose from. You never get tired of it. It fits any budget. It's fast, healthy. It is going to be the new Factor in your life. Yes, I'm a fan. Head to factormeals.com/yang50 and use code yang50 to get 50% off your first box and 2 free wellness shots per box while subscription is active. That's code yang50 at factormeals.com/yang50 to get 50% off your first box. Get Factor today. It's going to change the way you eat. And so this is one of the things too. Now, post-campaign, one of the stories that's come out that you and I have actually, I have my sympathies. So Kamala Harris raises $1.4 billion, loses, and then now the campaign owes something like $20 million. At least that's the reporting, and there's evidence that this is accurate.
Yeah.
And so then now they have to figure out how they can clear that debt.
Get out of that debt.
And Hillary Clinton took 5 years to clear her campaign debt, but she was still very, very active politically, and frankly very relevant because she became Secretary of State and a bunch of other things.
Debt. Like, it's very tough to live this, because you can't. If anyone's ever wound down a company before, they say the word wind down because you can't just flip a switch, right? You have pay, like, first of all, if you fire everybody and close down, then you still have another month of payroll or so, or severance or other things. Now, you don't do severance on campaigns, but you've got paying from time before. You have vendors, you have this, you have software platforms, you have other things, and campaigns in particular, you have to keep filing with the FEC every quarter, even if you haven't until you're approved to shut down. And while you have outstanding liabilities, you can't wind down. So you have to keep this damn thing open, which actually costs money as well. So very hard, but 20 million is a lot.
Yeah, so one of the things that happens too is that after the fact. So someone asked me. I mean, it was actually like a CNN personality, and they were asking me, like, what's next for Kamala, and then they asked, is she going to run for governor of California? And my first instinct was like, I think she's going to be able to clear the debt.
Yeah,
because if you're not active in that way, then it's very hard for people to. You
can transfer funds between campaigns. That's the big one. And the creative accounting. This is fun. Inside baseball.
Yeah,
you can buy the list.
You could buy the list.
Kamala's governor campaign can buy assets from a presidential campaign that could pay off debt, as long as it's fair market value. You can't overdo it. And to be fair, it is transparent. Like, you have to. It's all public record.
So that was my instinct when the CNN person was like, "Hey, what do you think is next for Kamala?" I thought to myself, she's going to run for governor of California because and she'll probably have human beings around her, professionals that frankly are pushing her to do that, because it's like, hey, we do this, then
I can make money. I can make my $30K
the
a
money,
month as a consultant.
The money you owe me gets paid.
That's true. There's probably
back.
plenty of consultants not getting paid.
So that was so here you heard it here first. That's going to be a prediction. We're going to do our predictions in another episode that is going to be the first of 25. This is meant to be a reflection on 24. Happy holidays, somewhat festive. I'm trying to get in a good mood.
What we could talk about, but it may not put you in a good mood.
Oh, what's that?
I went to this campaign manager conference at Harvard.
Oh, we should talk about that. This is something. So check it out. Zach, as the campaign manager for Dean Phillips, gets invited to Harvard, the Kennedy School, where all of the campaign managers then unpack what the heck happened in the cycle. So I'm sure there's all sorts of gossip.
So I have lots to tell you. Well, so here's the context at Harvard, and this is actually, I think this is a good thing they do. Every 4 years at the end of a presidential cycle, they invite all the campaign managers, a lot of reporters, and political who's, if you will, and then the leadership teams of the general candidates. And so you had you had myself, and you had all of the Republican, because we didn't have a primary. So I was certainly a pity invite, which is fine. They had all the Republican presidential candidates.
You're the coolest, man.
Coolest guy
you
there.
Upgraded it.
Definitely not. I felt very out of my element, for what it's worth. And then probably 4 to 6 people from the Trump team and the Biden team. And then what they do is you have a dinner that night.
You mean the Harris team?
What did I say? Biden team?
Yeah.
Freudian slip or something.
Same difference.
The Harris team. Excuse me. And what they do is there's a dinner that night, and all the campaign managers get asked a couple of questions in front of the room. And then that was Thursday night. And then Friday, they had a couple sessions, but one was all the Republican campaign managers talking about the primary, all on the record. And then the leadership of the two campaigns talk about the general, and they write it all down, and they put it in a book that goes in the Harvard Library, as they call it, the first draft of history or so. Just a little cheesy, but cool. So here's my takeaways. A couple fun ones. One, in no particular order, all the Republicans hated DeSantis, which was funny to watch. They just hated that guy. 2, Trump's team was, I don't know what my expectations were, but in my opinion, wildly competent. They had, and maybe that comes with being the front runner going into an election, but they had a vision, they had a strategy, and they executed. And they knew what they were doing. And And they did.
You know one press account that made me think their team was competent? The Tim Alberta Trump piece.
Yeah.
It actually
Tim's
made me think
reporter.
it's like, oh, these guys actually seem like that, you know.
They just knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
They're like in the primary, like, we're taking out DeSantis because he's trying to pull from us. We'll win the rest after that. And they were good at what I thought we were pretty good at in our own way.
By the way, one
attention
reason
economy.
why they were able to do a number on DeSantis was that Trump's right-hand woman, Susie Wiles, used to work for DeSantis.
Ron, yeah.
And then,
she's very
and then
good.
They pushed her out. And so she knew all of Ron's weaknesses and skeletons. Yeah. She literally was there at the Trump campaign being like, you know what Ron's really sensitive about? His height.
Yeah.
So let's just plant stories about lifts in his boots, which was probably true as well.
Yep.
And so imagine, it would be like if Zach went to work for someone else to do a number on me. Like, it'd be pretty easy for him to do a number on me because, you know, he'd be like, I know exactly what's
so
going to like.
They were a couple of takeaways I found, like, they were so good at trolling. So for example, Trump never did a debate. And so typically the night before, and we were not good at this because we were essentially nobodies, but what you'll do is try to have an off-the-record dinner with reporters the night before a debate and kind of butter them up and let them get to know the candidate, especially if it's a sitting congressman or senator or governor. Like, feels good, the reporters get, and they tend to write, they're human beings. They tend to be a little more nicer to you and excited if they get that access. So Trump was not on the debate stage, but would come the night before and do an off-the-record dinner with reporters so that he would steal that reporter juice from all of the other candidates. Since he was a front runner, they would all take that dinner. So the reporters are spending time with Trump. And then there was a story that apparently had some merit. That's
pretty smart.
DeSantis ate pudding, like a snack pack, chocolate pudding, with his fingers.
Sure.
And so their super PAC ran an ad, and you should Google this. Just Google Ron DeSantis pudding ad. I was in tears laughing at this. It's just a disgusting dude, like, just scooping pudding with his fingers. It's gross. It's like, Ron DeSantis, get your fingers out of our government, blah blah blah. Like, get your dirty fingers out of it. But anyway, so this got a little legs, and then at their reporter dinner, they passed out pudding snack packs to all the reporters. Like, that's the shit they're doing. Another example was they would put out, anytime there was a good poll on President Trump, they would put it out in the ether, as we did too. And you brand it up and you put it in your colors, etc. And there was one, I don't remember the name of it, but it was like a crypto kitty account, some version of, like, a cat was definitely involved, and it was like definitely like a degen internet personality, did like a Twitter poll, and Trump won by like 80%, like dominated. And so they branded it up Trump and put it out like Donald Trump dominating the field, right? MSNBC ran with this, saying, look how stupid the Trump campaign is. They're putting out Twitter polls that don't mean anything. And they're meanwhile laughing hysterically because MSNBC is leading with a poll with Donald Trump dominating the field in the background. So, like, stuff like that they would do, I thought was, stuff we would try to do, it's like hilarious and like somewhat helpful to the average person, and the media gets all in a tizzy. The last thing, there was a Biden official.
Harris?
Oh my gosh. A Harris official that said, I'll try it again. There was a Harris official at the dinner that said, we ran a flawless campaign, and flawless in quotes. And that was, I was sitting next to a reporter, our friend Brittany Johnson, and I was like, that's your headline. That's an insane statement. Imagine losing and saying it was flawless. That's insane. So, will the Dems learn? I don't know.
We ran a flawless campaign, except for not having the candidate go on the number one interview possibility.
Except for not outperforming.
Except for
our
spending
$1.4
billion and getting our clocks cleaned. I mean, at that point, it's like, why do you have operatives at all?
What's the point? I don't get it.
If you're going to lose big. This podcast is sponsored by ExpressVPN. How did you choose which internet service provider to use? The sad thing is, most of us didn't have much of a choice because ISPs operate a lot like monopolies in the regions that they serve. They then use this monopoly position to take advantage of customers, and yes, they even sell your data, your activities to advertisers and big tech companies and you don't see a dime. That's why I protect my internet surfing and devices with ExpressVPN. When you use ExpressVPN, it's like a magic portal to a perfectly safe and anonymous internet. And don't take my word for it. This is the #1 VPN service according to CNET. It's used by major companies all over the world. So stop handing over your personal data to ISPs and other tech companies who then mine your activity and sell off your information. Protect yourself with a VPN I trust to keep my privacy online. Visit expressvpn.com/yang. That's EXPRESS VPN.com/yang to get 3 extra months free. Go to expressvpn.com/yang right now to learn more. Oh my gosh, you know what this reminds me of? It's so funny. So I was in the middle of my career, manager, and then my boss, who is the CEO of this company, gave me a book. It reminds me of this. It's so funny. I think it was written by a political operative, but it's called Dodging the Bullet. And then it's about like how to avoid taking responsibility for any professional failure.
Your boss handed you this?
Yeah, handed me this because what was funny is that we were a software company in healthcare context, and he was like, "Hey, there might be some point at which like there's some problem in the hospital setting, and then people might want to blame our product.
Can't be us,
but it can't be us. So just like like look at this book and da 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 da." And I was reading this book, and this book like it was essentially. Like, if you were an upright human, you'd be like, whoa, this is a little bit messed up. This is like how to, essentially pass the buck, like in any way you can. But that's what that statement reminded me of. And I think it was from a political operative. And I have to say that that quote that you relayed, like, had me post something on X that said the culture of the consultant class is an underrated reason the Democrats lost.
Very much. It might be one of the biggest ones. And that I'll say this. So we all got to go around and everybody got like a couple questions as a campaign manager. And I said a version of what I said on our recap. I said, Dean, the question we all got was, why is your candidate in the race? And by the way, everybody's answer besides Trump was basically a version of it's my turn, right? I said, what I said on this podcast, I said it there, was that we thought that Trump's second term was both predictable and preventable. And that we went to all the usual suspects in the Democratic Party. Dean went to all of them and called them and tried to get them to run, and they either wouldn't take his call or told him to pound sand. And so we ran because we think we need to be the party, the Democrats need to be the party of democracy and have a primary, and that Joe was going to lose. And so the Republicans there were nodding, and like, they got it. But I tell you, there were reporters there and Democratic operatives that looked at me like I had 6 heads. They're looking at me like this interesting, like this somehow I felt in the beginning of the Yang campaign, like the same vibe I got. And I kind of walked away. I was like, I don't think they're going to learn anytime soon. Like,
probably not.
Yeah. Anyway, that was my takeaway from this thing.
Certainly that crew. Which reminds me of like a quote that I always enjoyed. It was from book The Jungle. I think it was Upton Sinclair.
By Upton Sinclair,
yeah. Yeah, it's it's very difficult to convince a man of something if his livelihood if his livelihood relies upon him not believing that thing.
Yep.
So I think that's what happens in certain journalistic circles, in certain professional political circles. It's like, in order for my job to continue and to make sense, it must mean that all of this weird inside baseball shit's like super important. And in that world, it would be, completely unfathomable for some backbencher, nobody congressman to somehow have the temerity to challenge the sitting president and head of the party and the person who controls the machine. And so, that like that they're kind of servants to the machine. And then if you try and hit them with logic or patriotism or service or common sense, it all just kind of flies right by them.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about this as a team, and I was talking about this to my wife the other day about because she's working for she's got her own show, but she's got like a company around it. And we were talking about my experience at UBS too when I was on Wall Street, is that you have indifference, you have bureaucracy, you have incentives to do all these things, right? But what happens is like when it's a big company, people disagree, or there's that's not the process, whatever it is, the things that delay progress. But at the end of the day, you're just like, shrug. It's UBS. It's not me. My name's on the back. Like, you know what I'm saying? And so I think that happens in DC all the time, like it would a big company. But the problem is that the consequence of this is not just like UBS has is a little more inefficient or a worse quarter or more bureaucratic, right? The problem is like our livelihoods, like our country, right? The bureaucracy versus the stakes are off, right?
Yeah, very much
you know
so.
What I mean?
And in large part because, we could go into it at length.
Anyway, yeah. We talk about happy stuff. But that was an adventure.
But I'm glad you got to go and have the Harvard adventure. I'm sure you got a lot out of it.
Yeah, and I learned a bit and got to see it. It was good to see it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Plus, the validation too. It's like
and I appreciate Harvard for doing it. In general, and appreciate them for having me. I don't mean to like poo-poo the event. I thought the event was great.
You hear that, everyone? Zach wants to get invited back to Harvard. No, I'm kidding.
No, I'm good.
I thought
someone else.
I thought there were no strings. No, I'm kidding.
Who's pulling the Harvard puppeteer in this podcast? Sorry.
Yeah, indeed. This podcast is sponsored by Helix Sleep. I've been a mattress guy since I can remember because I've always wanted to make sure I didn't develop back problems. I worked out, I still do. Maybe it's a different type of workout. Before I used to be all into heavy weights. Anyway, you know what I mean. I've been sleeping on a Helix Sleep Dawn Firm mattress for years, and it's been exactly what I've wanted. My kids also seek it out as the best mattress in the house, and all of my friends who've bought a Helix Sleep mattress from this podcast advertisement have told me in person, hey, it's exactly what I was looking for. Don't take my word for it. It's also the #1 mattress recommended by Wired and GQ and other people who like to sleep on mattresses and test them out. And right now, you can get 27% off site-wide plus 2 free Dream pillows with any mattress purchase. It's a free bedding bundle with any mattress order that's Luxe or Elite. What does that mean? You'd have to go to Helix's website to check it out. Go to helixsleep.com/yang. With Helix, better sleep starts now. Though I will say, like, our post-election conversation ended up really striking a chord. And so this is a little bit more of that. This was reflection. So first and foremost, happy holidays to everyone. This has been quite a year. I've been trying to synthesize and unpack. And I said in our earlier conversation that I was saddened by a number of things that happened down the stretch because in our case too, I mean, one thing that both helps and hurts is like we fought the good fight to try and make it. I mean, we did more than 99.9% of folks. And by the way, again, if you joined us in that, thank you. And if you have been supportive of us generally, even sometimes you're like, like I'm not sure I agree with that, but it's at least interesting. Thank you for keeping up with us and this journey. This is in some ways the conclusion of a 4-year arc. Post the campaign, which I've been thinking about a lot. Campaign ends beginning of 2020, and now it's the end of 2024. And when I think about our adventures of this past year, yes, but even the past several years, it's been remarkable. Like one of the things I joked with Evelyn about, it's like, it seems like we managed to be at the nexus of history an awful lot for people who, if you think about it technically, have no business being anywhere near. It's like, when we were at in the DNC primary debates in the last cycle, sometimes I would joke with Zach. I'd be like, "Welcome to the highest levels of politics." That was a running joke in the campaign. And to be fair, and some of the Yang gang would come up to me and be like some of the ones I got to know, like respect, like a lot of builders were like,
I see what you guys are having to do, and I don't envy you, but also like I'm glad you're there because I feel like I would be having the same reactions and making them the same decisions in your shoes. And I felt seen there, and I think you did too. And there were times on all of this campaign, you're like, is this how this works? Like, is this what's happening? And I would be curious, and I think at some point Elon and Vivek were probably the two outsiders in this cycle, in ways that I think I'm sure at some point they'll have like debrief podcasts about what they're doing, et cetera. And I bet they'd have similar.
Vivek for
takes.
sure is a candidate.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Trump is just, Elon's just Trump's buddy right now.
Well, I mean, one of my jokes was if Elon showed up in Iowa and started giving away $1 million a day, I might have won like that cycle. You know what I mean?
That's true.
You know, I mean, $1 million a day. We're going very far in Iowa.
You only need, what's 40,000 votes you need, yeah.
I don't know. It would have been a good time, though. You know, it was a different time. It's crazy what's happened over the last 4 years. But it's awesome to think about how far we've come and how much we've accomplished over this period. I just want to say thank you to everyone. Happy holidays to you and yours, your friends and family. I certainly am going to try and get some family time in. And I hope you all do too. Hope you do too, Zach.
Yeah. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. Whatever you celebrate, enjoy it. It's been a good year, man.
It's been,
it's
been a year. You know, like I would hesitate before saying,
politically has not been a great year, but operationally, I think we've had some fun stuff we're doing. Like,
yeah, I'm proud of a lot of stuff we did this year. Yeah. It's true.
Yeah, that's the thing. You gotta stay positive. You can't.
Hope you are too. Next episode after the best of end of the year is going to be our predictions for 2025.
Yeah.
Is it going to be better than 24? How could it possibly be better than this year? Tune in to find out. But happy holidays, happy new year. Hug your loved ones. If you can't be with them, definitely call them. Let them know how much they mean to you. And try and enjoy the season. There's a lot to be grateful for.
Love you all.